The incident was on 16th and Ridge Avenue. It was around 9 p.m. on March 4th. Okay, so Derek exits his friend's truck around 16th. A cop comes out of a bar called Neil Lounge, and he talked to his partner. Then he gets back into his car, and then they spin around. Then they approach Derek. The officer asked him where you coming from, and he just started searching his pockets. He did it. He put him on the wall, did a full body search. Then about 6 to 7 bike cops appeared along with one patrol car. They asked him, or he asked rather, what was wrong and why he was being detained. They didn't say anything. They kept him there for about 25 to 30 minutes. Then a second patrol car arrives with a sergeant, and he's standing up against the gate. The sergeant shines the light on him, and the two patrol officers asked the sergeant, "Is this him, Sergeant?" The sergeant was quiet for a minute. I'm assuming he's talking to the suspect, and the sergeant says, "Yeah, that's him." He's handcuffed, put in the car, never read his rights. He was asking, can I get a lawyer or something? They told him, "Shut up, you don't get a lawyer at this process." He was taken to the 22nd district where he was processed, and the officer, I guess, who was in charge of the cell, came around. He asked what was going on. They said he didn't know. Later on, someone told him, "They're going to let you go soon. The case has been declined." And 30 minutes later, he was let go after being held for 24 hours. So, basically, what this prompts for us is, first of all, do you feel as though his civil rights were violated, and could he possibly have a civil rights case?
The answer is yes to both. His civil rights were definitely violated, and yes, he has a strong case. This is the problem in not just Philadelphia and not just Pennsylvania, but throughout America. There's so much crime that the public has pretty much surrendered their rights to the police. Ben Franklin said those who would give up a little bit of liberty for a lot of security deserve neither. And that's a great point. In fact, his exact quote was, "Those who would give up a little bit of freedom for a little bit of liberty, for a little bit of security, deserve neither." And the public, when they look at this, they say, "Wow, there's so much crime out there, we need some security." Now, I know I have civil rights, I know I have civil liberties, but I'll give that up to the police if I can be protected. I'm saying all that to say this. The law, since the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, in the Fourth Amendment, it talks about liberties. It talks about probable cause. What all that means, without being too complicated, is this. It comes down to this. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution says that before the police can arrest you, they must have probable cause. And by the way, an arrest is basically when you reasonably believe that you're not free to leave. So if cops run up on you and pull out their guns, they never said the word you're under arrest, but you don't feel like you're free to leave. So this is how it works. And I try to be as direct and as plain. Malcolm X always talked about keep it plain. When you talk to lawyers, they tend to use this fancy legal jargon to make people think they're smarter than the average person, but I want to make this plain like Malcolm said. Before the police can arrest you, they must have probable cause. In the case of this young man, they had no probable cause. Probable cause means a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed or is being committed. So if the cops have reasonable belief that a crime is being committed or has been committed, they can move in and arrest the guy. They didn't have that in this case because nobody saw anything or nobody said anything at that time about that person, so they didn't have probable cause. But then some people say, "Well, Mike, isn't there something a little less than probable cause that allows the police to confront people?" The answer is yes. There's a legal term called reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion means that the police don't know as a matter of fact that you committed a crime. The police don't know as a matter of fact that you are committing a crime. But they have reasonable suspicion, which means a reasonable belief that there might be a crime involved. Probable cause is not definite, but it's pretty sure. You pretty much, you see a guy running down an alley at 3 o'clock in the morning with a TV in his arms. Now, if I'm a cop, I'm going to arrest him. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, running down the alley with TV. But once I arrest him, I find out that it's his TV. He had an argument with his wife who didn't want him to watch the game. So he stormed out of the house, grabbed the TV, and went out the back door. Okay, now we know that. But I didn't know that when I saw you. So let me back up. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that's the federal Constitution, and Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution said that you must have probable cause. And probable cause means a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed or is being committed. Now, in fact, I want to go through three things. The first one is probable cause, the next one is reasonable suspicion, and the one beneath that is something called stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is blatantly illegal. So I want to put it all in context, beginning with what's clearly legal to what's totally illegal. So let me do it that way. Okay. Probable cause. Probable cause means that a crime has been committed and it's probable or more likely than not that you committed it. So probable cause means a crime has been committed and it's probable or more likely than not that you committed it. Now the police move in and arrest you. Probable cause. Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows that. Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution allows that. Okay, I got no beef with that as a lawyer. You got my guy. Let's ratchet it down a little bit. Reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion means the cops don't really know that you committed a crime. They can't really say it's more likely than not that you committed it, but they have some reasonable belief. They have what they call an articulable suspicion. They can't really prove that you committed, but it seems that something is fishy. So with that, the police can't quote unquote arrest you, but they can stop and question.
Okay.
But like, sir, I see that there's blood going down your legs. What happened? Or you seem to have a whole bunch of money and jewelry stuffed in your pockets. We just need to question you. That's called reasonable suspicion. On cop shows on TV, they talk about what they call a Terry stop. A Terry stop stems from a case in Ohio, Terry versus Ohio. In that case, a guy was stopped, or some guys were stopped and questioned, and ultimately they were arrested and ultimately convicted. So the Supreme Court in Terry versus Ohio said, yeah, the cops didn't need to have probable cause to grab these guys, but they needed reasonable suspicion, which they had. What does reasonable suspicion mean? In the Terry case, it was from Ohio, I believe it was in Cleveland. There was one guy standing about a half a block away from a jewelry store. He met with the second guy. So the two guys walk toward the jewelry store, look in the window, and walk past. And then they go back to the corner. Then another guy gets involved. So you got 2, 3, 4 times these group of guys going toward the jewelry store, looking in, going back, looking. And the cop observes this. Now, a cop, like any reasonable person, like, why do these guys keep congregating on one corner, walking toward the jewelry store, and coming back? The Supreme Court said that's reasonable suspicion. They didn't break into the store, they didn't display any guns, they didn't do anything, but based on what was going on there, the cops now have reasonable suspicion, which equals what we lawyers now call a Terry stop. So the cops moved in, grabbed the guys, questioned them, and found guns, and arrested them, and they were convicted. So the court said, even though a robbery had not occurred, the cops had reasonable suspicion. That's legal. So we go from probable cause, clearly legal, reasonable suspicion, legal, down to what the Philadelphia city government came up with, this stop and frisk nonsense. Stop and frisk has no basis in law and no basis in fact. If you went to the U.S. Supreme Court or even the state Supreme Court and used the term stop and frisk, they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Do you mean probable cause? Do you mean reasonable suspicion? Because there's no such thing as this stop and frisk. In fact, I'm a member of the ACLU. In fact, I used to be a board member of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And in 2007, we filed a lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia in connection with this stop and frisk. Because we found out that 72% of the pedestrian stops were against black men. 72%. So how that means you're saying that basically that 72% of the people committing crime you think are black. So you're just going to move in on them, and that's what the young man that you're talking about, he was a victim of that. So I'm sure the DA's office realized that. That's why they ultimately chose not to prosecute him, but still his rights were violated. The problem he has, though, is this. Even though he has the right to sue and would possibly win, the question is, what are the damages? Anytime you sue in civil court, you got to show two things. One, that somebody violated your rights and therefore damaged you, and two, that there's a value to that damage. So you can show that, yeah, the cops illegally stopped you and arrested you and all that kind of stuff, so clearly they were wrong. But then when you get to the second question, what are the damages? They have to show that somebody wronged you. In this case, they wronged him by illegally arresting him. And then in court, you got to show what the damages are to that wrong. In this case, unless you could say that, hey, I had a job making $100,000 a year, and the cops held me for a full day. I was held incommunicado. I couldn't get to my job. They fired me. Okay, now you lost a $100,000 a year job. So you got to be able to put a monetary value on it. And if you can't, they might give you a nominal verdict. A nominal verdict could be $100, could be $10. That's not enough. For you to talk about your mental anguish, your emotional distress, that's not really good enough. You got to be able to concretely and specifically put a monetary value on it. And the police pretty much know that. Plus, they know that you got to go out and hire an attorney. And if an attorney hears that you weren't shot by the cops, you weren't beaten down by the cops, you weren't injured physically by the cops, you were just quote unquote inconvenienced for 24 hours, nobody cares about that. So sadly, this young man has the right to sue, but it wouldn't go anywhere.
Okay. Now, it seems to be, false arrest and malicious prosecution both seem to be a problem in Philadelphia. But what can city residents do about it?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that, because far too often we always talk about problems but never the solutions. Clearly it was a false arrest because the police had neither probable cause nor reasonable suspicion. They had this stop and frisk nonsense, which is blatantly illegal. As far as malicious prosecution, this was not that case. There is a lot of that, don't get me wrong, where often, that's why I was so shocked when you told me that they didn't prosecute, because usually, because the cops and the prosecutors work hand in hand, almost whatever the cops bring to them, they'll prosecute. There's this guy, Jeffrey Coard, who's a cop who is a corrupt cop, along with his brother. And he and his brother got this quote-unquote informant, and they made up these lies about having probable cause to arrest people. So this cop was going out and just pretty much destroying people's lives. In fact, there's nearly 70 persons who was victimized by the Kujic brothers. And the police accepted his police reports, but worse than that, DA's office accepted them at preliminary hearings to take to trial. That's where malicious prosecution comes in. So whether it's false arrest by the police or malicious prosecution by the DA's office, what can people do? It's three things. It's four things they can do. The first thing they should do is to file a complaint with Internal Affairs. That's not going to go too far because cops tend to protect cops. But by filing a complaint in Internal Affairs, you begin to create a paper trail. Joe files on Monday, Sam files on Tuesday, May files on Wednesday. And now you got 5, 10, 15 different persons filing complaints against this one cop. So you build up a paper trail. So that's the first thing. File a complaint with Internal Affairs. Second thing, file a complaint with the Police Advisory Commission. That's a city organization not tied to the police, so they're not in bed with the cops. That's the good news. But the bad news is they have no subpoena powers. So by not having subpoena powers, the cops can say, and often do, to hell with you. I got this notice from the Police Advisory Commission, but I don't care. You guys have no authority over me, so they ignore it. But sometimes you can get something out of it, and if nothing else, you create another paper trail. That's the second thing. The third thing is to file a civil rights lawsuit, but that normally involves serious damage to you, a serious beat down or that kind of thing. And not necessarily even that, because Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, a young black PhD, was a victim of that. And he was able to settle. But why was he able to settle? Because he's a professor. He's a media personality. They didn't know who they quote unquote were effing with when they stopped him. They thought he was a regular, they figured it was a young black guy with a late model, expensive car, he must be a drug dealer. So the third thing is to file a lawsuit if there's a basis. But then there's a fourth thing that I talk about, and I've been doing for the last, 10 years along with attorney Leon Williams. It's called a private criminal complaint. private criminal complaints are better than internal affairs complaints. They're better than police advisory commission complaints. They're better than civil lawsuits. Why? Because the internal affairs, they protect themselves. Police advisory doesn't have much authority. And even if you win $1 million lawsuit, that money doesn't come from the cops. That money comes from you as the victim because you're a taxpayer. So the taxpayers pay. If it was a situation where the cop had to pay out of his salary, that's one thing. But the cop suffers no harm even if you win $1 million. That's where the fourth step comes in, the private criminal complaint. Private criminal complaint is where you get a chance to charge the cop with a crime in the same way that cops can get you charged with a crime. So let's say the cop not only falsely arrests you, but roughs you up, punches you, and kicks you. If you punch your neighbor, if you kick your neighbor, you're charged with simple assault and aggravated assault. Why not the cops? I'll wrap this up by saying back in October of 1998, police officers shot and killed an unarmed black man, Donta Dawson. And the DA back then, Lynn Abraham, refused to prosecute, ultimately because of local community pressure. She did prosecute, but she prosecuted on the wrong charges, and the case was thrown out. So I'm looking at this case and saying, I'm really tired of the cops brutalizing our community. I know about this thing called the private criminal complaint. I know that on paper, it seems to say that if the police don't take your complaint seriously, you can file this private criminal complaint and bypass the police and go straight into court. Bypass the DA's office and go straight into court. The law basically was designed primarily, many people think, for nuisance complaints. Your next door neighbor's kid is playing with a ball up against your window. He's about to break. You call the cops. Cops say that's not important. Go to file a private criminal complaint. Make a long story short and wrapping this up in 30 seconds, I filed a private criminal complaint seeking murder against a white cop who shot and killed Donta Dawson. And on April 6, 2001, a common pleas court judge of Philadelphia granted my private criminal complaint, which made history. It was the first time in Philadelphia history, first time in Pennsylvania history that a white on-duty cop was charged with the murder of a black person. So that's what you do. You got to make cops feel that they would suffer the same penalty you would suffer if you were convicted of a crime, that, and if they felt that they would suffer that same penalty, they would stop doing what they're doing. So those are the 4 steps to resolve the problem.
Great. Lastly, to kind of wrap up too, I was trying to find so much stats on, because I could find endless pages of stories dating back to the 70s on false arrests and civil rights lawsuits that were settled as a result. But I couldn't find any concrete statistics. Do you know, or is there anywhere that says how much the city pays out?
Absolutely. You can get that through 2 sources. The local NAACP, because the local Philadelphia chapter, the NAACP, headed by Jerry Mondesire, joined with the local chapter, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And the best way to reach them is at 215-592-1513, 215-592-1513, and just ask for their records in regard to the civil rights lawsuit that they filed or threatened to file against the city. So now the NAACP got complaints from people, the ACLU got all the legal stuff, and together they became a unified army. So you can get all the stats you want from the local ACLU office.
Great. Does it seem like Philadelphia Police Department has taken any steps or tried to improve any of this, like by the DA declining to press these charges, or are they trying to work towards better community relations?
Are they trying to? No. Are they being forced to? Yes. I have to admit that the local media has done a great job, in particular the Daily News with its column, actually a series called Tainted Justice. And Tainted Justice showed the city of Philadelphia what we in the black community already knew. So now when the mainstream white media is talking about what really goes on when the police do what they do, that forces the cops. So the cops are not doing the right thing because it's the right thing. They're doing the right thing because they're forced to do the right thing. But like I always say, I don't care why you do the right thing as long as you do the right thing. So pretty much the police are forced to do the right thing. That's why we're getting a little more justice.
Okay. Great. That wraps up my piece.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it, man. I really